The Las Vegas Raiders are starting to finally get healthy, and today I want to talk about what are some expectations as we kind of go forward. There's also a player that some people think is on the trade block, or at least the Raiders could potentially go out and get this guy, and I think it's a massive need for the Raiders. We're going to talk about it in this video. Let's just get into this. So Pete Carroll spoke earlier, and he basically told us that the Raiders are expected to get a bunch of their starting caliber players back. Brock Bowers obviously has missed pretty much most of the season with injury. I know he played the first 2 to 3 weeks, but realistically, he wasn't healthy. But he is now fully healthy. In fact, the 2 practices that the Raiders had before the bye week, he actually practiced in full on the second one, essentially the last practice they had before the team kind of broke and essentially kind of went their own ways. Brock Bowers has fully practiced, and right now he's apparently fully healthy. So the Raiders should be able to get Brock Bowers, a guy who could change this offense. And, I bring this up because I know a lot of people are ready for the Raiders to tank, but based off of some of the decisions we made, right? Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, the Raiders are still technically in like this win now mode. And, we might not win the Super Bowl this year, but I think the Raiders still think this regime, right? Like Chip Kelly, Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, this group of guys, I still think the Raiders actually think will win and have success. And it's going to start right now. It's going to start on this side of the bye week. And obviously having guys like Brock Bowers back will be huge for the Raiders. Now, we still have some injuries, but again, Brock Bowers does help the Raiders. And I'm actually excited to see what the offense can look like with our best offensive player back. And don't overlook, Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the NFL. This guy's game changer. And I know some people compare like guys like Tyler Warren to Brock Bowers, but I don't even think those guys are in the same category. Brock Bowers literally makes plays. He makes people miss. He runs people over. Tyler Warren doesn't do that, right? Or at least from the tape that I've watched, he doesn't really do that. I don't think those guys are in the same category. Again, Brock Bowers is just a different type of player, and he is back for the Raiders. And again, I just want to see what this offense looks like with Brock Bowers out there. And I want to see if Geno Smith can actually open it up. Yesterday I talked about Tyler Lockett and kind of what he brings to the Raiders. And I think a lot of people misunderstood kind of what I was trying to say about Lockett. Tyler Lockett is 33 years old. Totally understand that. He is not the guy he was 6 years ago while he was in his prime. But you can make the argument Tyler Lockett may still be our best deep threat as he comes to the Raiders right now. So the Raiders are essentially adding 2 new pieces to the offense that we did not have 2 weeks ago. You're adding Brock Bowers, one of the best tight ends. You're adding Bech, a guy that Geno Smith has had a lot of success in the past with. And again, I get it. It was in the past. He's 33 today. But the guy was once an explosive playmaker in terms of being able to catch those deep passes. Tyler Lockett was very, very good under Geno Smith. In the years that Geno Smith, kind of shined early on with the Seahawks. So, again, the Raiders are adding players and they're getting better on the offensive side. And they're getting healthy. Now, I think that's going to allow the Raiders to have success. And again, momentum. We'll see if we can carry something for the rest of this season into next season. Another guy we're getting back is going to be Lonnie Johnson, who, if you guys remember, long time back, right, he was considered our starting safety. I know a lot of people forget this, but the Raiders early on in camp, they had Lonnie Johnson as well as Isaiah Palamau splitting, that safety, and then Jeremy Chin was essentially playing nickel for the Raiders. And with Lonnie Johnson, when he got hurt, way back when he did get hurt, we were told this is going to kind of change how the Raiders approach the defensive side. Jeremy Chin was no longer going to play in the slot. Instead, he kind of had to play that split safety role. And over the course of the season, we kind of saw how that hasn't really worked out. Right? Jeremy Chin, Isaiah Palamau, they're not really split safeties. Those guys are both kind of like linebackers, big safeties, right? Like if you want to get into that big safety look. The Raiders don't really have true safeties that are like split safeties or guys that are like cover 3 safeties. But Lonnie Johnson was supposed to be the guy for the Raiders, and he's coming back. So again, I know I'm not trying to say the Raiders will win the Super Bowl, but I just want to see if they can have a little bit more success as they kind of go forward. I think bringing back Lonnie Johnson will allow the Raiders to have success. The training camp reports were that this guy was supposed to be really good for the Raiders this year, and again, we'll see what he kind of looks like. You can always consider the fact that some of these guys, they're kind of playing now for what they'll look like next year. So guys like Lonnie Johnson, if he's a good safety, he could potentially be our starting safety next year. So I want to see what Lonnie Johnson can do. Obviously, Brock Bowers is coming back. And if the Raiders don't trade Jacoby Myers, he's expected to play as well. Pete Carroll is pretty clear that, Jacoby Myers kind of worked out right before that final game against the Chiefs, and he almost ended up playing for the Raiders. Although he wants to be traded, and the report is that he will eventually be traded, Pete Carroll still thinks he'll end up playing as well. And then, of course, Maxx Crosby got hurt, and we'll see where he's kind of at. But the Raiders are getting healthy, and again, I just want to see what this team looks like as we kind of go forward. And I'm not saying I expect the Raiders to win Super Bowls, but I just want to see if they're competitive against any of these different teams. You know, the Broncos, it's a great test to see what the Raiders are against a team like the Broncos. The Broncos dropped like 40-plus points on the Dallas Cowboys, and they shut down a very, very high-powered offense down that was the Dallas Cowboys. And let's be honest, you know, the Raiders have to compete with these teams, right? The Chiefs, the Broncos, the Chargers. And we play the Chiefs and Chargers 2 more times as the season kind of comes to an end. I'll play the Broncos twice. So we'll see if the Raiders can have any sort of success against these teams. There's a report that's kind of interesting. You know, I don't think this is going to end up happening, but the report right now is that the Cowboys have yet to engage in a contract extension with wide receiver George Pickens. And if you guys don't know, this guy's basically on a 1-year contract with the Cowboys. And some people think George Pickens could kind of, maybe not reset the market, right? That's probably not the right term, but some people think this guy could end up getting paid as like a top 10 wide receiver. And he's played like a pretty damn good wide receiver, and he's found a lot of success with Dak Prescott. And I said this early on in this video, but I think this is the biggest need that the Raiders have on their offense right now. You know, you bring in Tyler Lockett, that's great for short term. You're going to move off of Jacoby Myers at some point. I think that also makes sense given Jacoby Myers. He's a number 2 wide receiver, not a true number 1 wide receiver. George Pickens, on the other hand, is a true number 1 wide receiver. Could the Raiders say, hey, let's go out there and bring in a guy like George Pickens? You know, it's possible that they trade for him. I don't think that's realistically, I don't think it's realistic given that the Cowboys just brought this guy in this past offseason. But keep in mind, it's not guaranteed that George Pickens will be back with the Dallas Cowboys. So for the Cowboys, if you can net yourself like a 2nd-round pick potentially, a team that needs a true number 1 wide receiver, for a receiver who, when George Pickens came into the NFL, it was kind of raw, right? He came out, I believe he was Brock Bowers' teammate at Georgia. Don't quote me on that. But, he came out, he's a little raw. And in the NFL, when he got here, you always kind of saw the talents. You always saw the potential, the upside, and he was never really able to figure it out. And then he got with the quarterback like Dak Prescott, and Geno Smith is has a lot of similarities to a guy like Dak Prescott. That is that these guys want to be in shotgun. These guys want to push the ball downfield. They want to, be able to have a good pocket up front. They want to be able to throw the ball. Now, obviously, the big difference between Geno and Dak is going to be the offenses that they're on, right? The Raiders' offense up to this point. O-line's pretty bad. Playmakers are pretty bad. Then you say that, it's kind of on the younger side versus the Cowboys, elite offensive line. CeeDee Lamb, elite wide receiver. The Raiders don't have that right now. But you are building towards that. You have some investments kind of in place, right? You made some offensive line investments. You have put investments into some of your younger receivers. You got a running back who will eventually develop into a top-tier running back. And you got Brock Bowers, who I think is elite. But pairing him up with a guy like George Pickens could absolutely change this Raiders offense. Now, obviously, I still think the Raiders need to get a quarterback, like for long-term purposes. But if you're saying we want to win the Super Bowl in the next 2 to 3 years and we want to be competitive, George Pickens adds a whole nother element to the Raiders offense. Now, I also understand there's some issues with Pickens. Right? Some people think, hey, he's not really he's not very smart as a wide receiver. He does dumb things. Right? You'll see this guy make a nice catch and then he'll like taunt people and get like 15-yard penalties. But the thing with a guy like Pickens and what he allows you to do with a guy like Geno Smith is he allows a guy like Geno Smith to throw him those 50-50 passes. Trey Tucker's not catching 50-50 passes. Geno tried throwing those 50-50 passes to Dante Thornton. Thornton just does not have the ability to go up and snatch a ball out of the air. Pickens has that. Tyler Lockett, who the Raiders added, right, at least in the past, has had that, which is why the Raiders are bringing in guys like Lockett. I think Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, John Spytek, I think these guys know what Geno Smith has had success with in the past. And I think a lot of what they wanted to do this year was to rely on Brock Bowers to be able to kind of make those plays. But obviously that injury early on this season kind of messed all of that up. So I think for the Raiders, at this point, would it be smart to go out there and say, we can bring in George Pickens and we can pay him because we do have some money obviously clearing up with the Christian Wilkins contract ultimately going to get cleared up after this season. I think it's an interesting thing that the Raiders have to consider. Some people think George Pickens is a top 10 wide receiver. It's debatable, right? He's definitely very, very, very talented. And you just don't find those guys unless you're drafting generally in like the top 10 to 12 picks. Unless the draft is like super, super deep. And even then, like most of the time now, guys like CeeDee Lamb and, Justin, most of the time, these guys don't slip outside of like the top 10. When there's Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors and Jamar Chases, when there's those type of guys coming out, they're top 10 picks, usually. George Pickens has a lot of potential. So if the Raiders, let's just say theoretically, do start to have success, you will never have another opportunity to get a wide receiver like that. So again, I think it's just something the Raiders have to kind of keep in mind. We'll see what kind of ends up happening as we go forward. We have two quick updates that I want to just get into. The Raiders released linebacker Brian Asamoah, who was on the practice squad for the Raiders. This one's kind of interesting because he never played for the Raiders, but he had potential, man, and I'm surprised that the Raiders did not utilize him, given, Jermaine Pratt obviously ended up leaving. Our linebackers are kind of bad, right? I'm going to be honest with you guys. Landon Roberts struggles in coverage. He got picked apart against the Chiefs. If you guys remember, we watched that film breakdown right after the Chiefs game. Our linebackers got picked apart. Devin White, I think, is good, but is he a true cover linebacker? Probably not. Asamoah could have easily been our best cover linebacker, and the Raiders did not even give this guy an opportunity. They went ahead and released him. Maybe they look at guys like Cody Lindenberg and Tommy Eichenberg and feel like, hey, those two guys are the guys we want to develop for the future. We'll see what the Raiders actually, plan to do at that linebacker position. Maybe it's Jamal Adams that they'll rely on a little bit more. I do think the Raiders, at some point, you have to allow the younger players to get those opportunities. You have to put the younger linebackers out there and say, go make some plays. And even the younger defensive linemen, right? We got 2 D tackles that we drafted. Let's let these young guys play. Maybe not yet. Maybe we'll wait 2-3 more weeks, 2-3 more losses. Maybe then at that point the Raiders can switch over and get into the younger guys. But Asamoah would have been a great linebacker to pivot to from a guy like Landon Roberts, who's well past his prime in my personal opinion, especially defending the pass. But the Raiders did release this guy. He is no longer with the Raiders. Again, kind of not surprising, but definitely wanted to see him get an opportunity. And then finally, this one doesn't impact us too much, like in the short term, but Broncos star cornerback Patrick Surtain is dealing with a pectoral injury and expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. Now, this is important because the Raiders play the Jacksonville Jaguars this Sunday, and then the following Thursday, if you guys don't know this, they play the Denver Broncos on Thursday Night Football. And even more so than that, I believe in 6 weeks from now, we actually play the Broncos the second time. So there is a chance Patrick Surtain does not play either of the 2 times that the Raiders play the Denver Broncos, which obviously in itself is pretty massive. Given, this guy, and I'm pretty sure the last time we played the Broncos, Surtain basically stuck, with Brock Bowers. He stayed on him pretty much the entire game. If the Broncos are unable to put Patrick Surtain on a guy like Brock Bowers, if we have a guy in Tyler Lockett, he starts to show a little bit of upside, right? And again, just generally speaking, if he starts to have a little bit of success, not having a guy like Surtain that could benefit the Las Vegas Raiders. And again, I am going to continue to operate that the Raiders need to win as many games as they go forward. I know some people are ready for the Raiders to tank this season and say, let's get a quarterback of the future. I just don't think that's going to happen at this point. I think the New York Jets are a lot more awful than the Raiders. Right? The Jets literally don't have anything going on their roster. And their quarterback's, I think, way worse than our quarterback, which is kind of crazy. And even more than that, there's some other teams, that have kind of started switching their quarterbacks out. The Saints, for example. And I think the Raiders, although our games aren't like super winnable, given we're kind of an awful football team, I think we're still going to win 2 to 3 more games easily, right? I just think it's going to end up happening. And I also think we're going to spoil some seasons. Maybe it's the Broncos, maybe it's the Chargers, potentially even the Chiefs. We'll see as we kind of go down the line. I'm going to continue to operate that I think the Raiders have to win games because I think it does build the momentum. It's completely different if the Raiders said, hey, We're going to come into this season, and Kenny Pickett's going to be our quarterback from day one. We did not give up a third-round pick for Geno Smith. We did not extend Geno Smith. Even more than that, maybe you say, hey, you know, Colt Miller, we're going to trade you for a first-round pick. I would say at that point, tank the season, but that's not the decisions that John Spytek made. That's not the decisions that Pete Carroll or the Las Vegas Raiders made. Their decisions essentially were that we're going to go into this season and we're going to try to win. We're going to, you know, add guys like Jermaine Pratt. We're going to add guys like Jamal Adams. We're going to bring in Jeremy Chin, and we're going to extend some of the younger superstar players that we have. We're going to try to win now, and that's kind of the approach that the Raiders took. And that approach is not like, hey, it's just a one-year approach, and then you can kind of move forward going into the following season. Some of these decisions are going to impact us for 2 to 3 years. Geno Smith has a 3-year contract with the Raiders. And I know we could technically get out of it, but you know, we're still paying Jimmy G money. We're still paying Gardner Minshew money this year. That's because of decisions we made the last year and the year before that. If we're going to go into this next season and say move off of Geno, then we're going to incur dead cap hits for Geno for 2 more years. That's not good business in my opinion, right? Which is why I say that the Raiders have already made the decision that, hey, we're going to go into this next season with this current team, with this current quarterback and coaching staff, right? That was the decision they made at the beginning of this year when they hired that staff and made those trades. So again, I think for the Raiders, the best thing you can do is try to win some games, build that momentum, and actually go into the offseason feeling like we're a good football team. Not going to the offseason feeling like we're one of the worst teams in the NFL. We've won 1 or 2 games. We have a top 5 pick. And even then, you know, nothing's guaranteed. There might not even be a quarterback worthy of a first overall pick, or there might just be one. And we might not get that opportunity, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. We'll see what ends up happening as we kind of go forward. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.